Hey, if you're a fan of Westerns and the street shootout with two guys facing off in the middle of the street, you can thank one guy. And that's the guy we're going to talk about here. I really enjoyed doing my book on this character, and that is Wild Bill Hickok, because he's so colorful. He so fits the bill of what we celebrate in Westerns. And so many of the other guys, the other cats, Billy the Kid left one meager image, and we're trying to fill in all the gaps around that. Wyatt Earp left a bunch of pictures, but they're all of him looking like a banker. Jesse about the same. But Wild Bill Hickok, he left us just some fantastic pictures. And he walked the walk. He looked the look. He's the founder of the feast. You can take all the Westerns that have been filmed in the last 120 years and basically lay them right at James Butler Hickok's door. He is the founder of the feast. So we're going to talk a little bit about how he got there, what it means, some of the anomalies, some of the ridiculousness of him. When I was growing up, there were historians who thought that Hickok was gay. And I'll tell you about why they thought that as we go on. It says a lot more about the times I was growing up in than it did in Wild Bill Hickok's time. But that's some of the stuff. The other things are, is the dead man's hand a myth? We're going to answer that question. Was there a secret motive in the Tut shooting? And we're going to answer a lot of those questions. It's really going to be an interesting time here. As you may know or may not know, James Butler Hickok was born on the edge of the frontier, Troy Grove, Illinois, in 1837. He told his sister Lydia that he was going to do things when he grew up that Carson, as in Kit Carson, never thought of doing. And that's a pretty prescient little mind there, because that's exactly what he did. He did some outrageous things, and we're going to go through some of those. He and his brother Lorenzo wanted to go out west. Their father passed away, and their mother finally let them go in June of 1856. They got to St. Louis, Missouri, where they found a desperate letter from their mother saying, "Please come home, I'm ill." Lorenzo went home, and James Butler Hickok kept going. That's probably a selfish move on his part. But the history of the West wouldn't be the same if he had gone home at that time. It was many years before he actually did finally make it home. He went deep into Kansas. He found himself in the middle of bloody Kansas. Slavery was the issue. There were lynchings. There were massacres. There were all sorts of murders. In fact, he wrote one letter home, and he said, "I have seen since I have been here sights that would make the wickedest heart sick." And yet he hung on. He was a teamster. He was too heavy to be a Pony Express rider, but he worked for a couple of the offshoots of the companies that appealed to that business that was springing up in the West. And then the Civil War started, and he became a spy, legend says, for the Union. And he was involved in several battles. We won't go into any of that. But by 1865, at the end of the Civil War, he found himself in Springfield, Missouri, and that's where we're going to pick up our story here. And he was gambling. He was in the gambling fraternity. He was at the Lion House in Springfield, Missouri. And he was gambling with a friend of his, actually, Dave Tudd, who is an Arkansas boy. And they got sideways. Some say it's over a woman. Some say it was over somebody dating his sister, that kind of thing. But at some point, Dave Tutt humiliated Hickok by over a gambling debt. Tutt said that it was $35, and Hickok said it was $25, and they couldn't agree on it. And so Tutt reached over and grabbed Hickok's watch, which Hickok had on the table, and said, "I'm keeping this until you pay me what you owe me." And so that did not sit well with Hickok. And then the next thing that happened is that Tutt started to rub it in, and he would say, I'm gonna wear this watch," and he was humiliating Hickok. And the word got to James Hickok, and he said that when he was told that Tut was going to wear the watch on the plaza the next day, he said, well, if he's walking, there will be a dead man walking if he does that. Well, sure enough, they meet on the plaza. The date's July 21st, 1865. Tut has the watch on. He turns to show it to him. Some witnesses said that they attempted to negotiate, but Hickok showed his pistol, and Tut reached behind him and did the same. They both turned sideways in the dual fashion, and later one of the eyewitnesses said that they stepped it off, and it was 100 paces. Well, 100 paces is about 83 yards. So picture yourself basically on a football field, and you're standing in one end zone and looking down at the other, and you're shooting at a target that's turned sideways. And supposedly Tut fired and missed, and Hickok took aim. They said he put his pistol on his arm, which is kind of controversial because in the old Westerns, of course, nobody would do that move. That's a modern kind of move. But one of the eyewitnesses said that he did steady his pistol on his arm, and he shot, and he hit Dave Tut on the left side between the 5th and 7th rib. And Tut, I love how in Westerns, the person says something like, you got me. They grab their stomach and then they pitch forward and they're dead. But if you'll notice when you read the testimony of the OK Corral specifically, or in this case, Tut ran to the corner of the courthouse and then ran back out in the street and then fell over because there's this blast of adrenaline that goes through somebody who's been shot. If you've ever been on a deer hunt or seen deer or any kind of wounded animal, they have a tendency to run like crazy because it's your fight or flight, response. And anyway, Tut fell dead. Hickok was arrested. There was a 3-day trial. But then it starts to happen. And what happens is the media shows up. And in this case, it was a writer, George Ward Nichols, and he showed up from Harper's, and he interviewed Hickok probably in a saloon. And the next thing you know, on February 1867, the article appears on this incredible gunfight that happened. And Hickok's name is misspelled as Hitchcock, but it doesn't matter. Not bad for a guy named James. And in fact, his name is not Bill. Supposedly he was at a vigilante meeting, and somebody said he's a real Wild Bill, which was a common saying at the time, and the name stuck. So James Butler Hickok became Wild Bill Hickok. So now we got a very famous guy. He becomes a lawman intermittently. It's not like in the movies where he's the town tamer and he just goes from town to town. And he is tall, as you can see in this photo here. He's at the left there, and he wears his pistol butts forward. And this is what I'm talking about with the photos that are just so fantastic. Look at those guys, and look at Hickok. He just stands out like the prince of the pistoliers that he was. He loses some elections. He has some problems. He fast forward now, the 7th Cavalry. Let me find my notes on this. The 7th Cavalry. This is an incredible. He is jumped by 5 to 7 members of the 7th Cavalry in a saloon, and they grab him, pin him to the floor, and one of them pulls out a Remington pistol and puts it in his ear and pulls the trigger. And it hits on an empty chamber, and he is able to dislodge them. He ends up shooting several of them and escapes. So one of the things that you need if you're going to become a famous a gunfighter, Western character, is a fair amount of luck. It's luck that would turn sour, of course, at the end of our story. But he was very lucky in that instant and really shouldn't be around to tell that tale. Next thing happens is that Buffalo Bill has mounted his first show. He loses a bunch of money, and he goes out the next year. He forms this thing called the Combination, and it's him, it's Texas Jack Almejandro, and it's Wild Bill Hickok. And so Hickok hated show business. He hated the fakery. There's a famous story that during one of the scenes, as a scout, that he was supposed to take a drink of whiskey and tell a story, and he took a sip on the stage and spit it out and said, "Iced tea ain't whiskey, and I ain't telling no story." We got a huge laugh, okay? And whether this was planned or not, I'm not sure. But it was so good that they left it in the show. They did it every night, and it always got a huge laugh. The other thing is that Hickok would get bored, and he hated having to say his lines and stuff, and so he started abusing the extras by shooting too close to their legs. They were shooting blanks, but obviously they had a powder, and so he would shoot at their legs. And so in the scenes where they were supposed to be dying, he would shoot at their leg, and you're jumping around the stage, and he thought that was hilarious. Well, the people who were putting on the play did not think it was hilarious, including Buffalo Bill Cody. So he finally, up in upstate New York, decides he's had enough of it, and supposedly Cody gave him $500 and 2 Remington pistols as a going away present. And a really fascinating thing happens as he's leaving. He's walking down the street to leave show business, and a young newspaper kid recognizes him, and he says, and I quote, "Stag his nibs with WID, with the long hair." And I read this, 20, 30 years ago, and I thought, what the heck does that mean? Stag his nibs. Now, here's one of the things. People knock the internet, people knock Facebook, people knock it and say that it's ridiculous and they'd like to go back to another time. But I love it because I posted this and I said, what is stag his nibs mean? And I got the answers in it. There's actually an English retort to it that who's that posh guy that's putting on airs with the long hair? That's one version. And the New York version is a similar, who's that guy, that self-important guy who has the long hair. Now, speaking of long hair, one of the dichotomies, or one of the things that is an anomaly to the Western myth and the cowboy and all the Westerns you've seen, is that, of course, Wild Bill Hickok had really long hair because he was a scout, not a cowboy. He was never a cowboy, but he was a scout. And in that time, after the mountain men, all the scouts who worked for the army wore their hair long because it was a challenge, a taunt to the Native Americans. Come get it. If you think you're so tough, come get my hair. And so that's why all the scouts wore the long hair. Now, fast forward to when I was just a young buck and trying to find out the truth about all these Western characters that I love so much. A famous historian, I won't mention his name, he's long since deceased, but he said, obviously, Wild Bill Hickok was gay. He said he was homosexual, actually, at that time, because he had long hair, and like a woman, like a girl. And for all you youngsters out here who didn't know this, there was a time when people that, kind of looked like me, maybe had hair over the ear, and you'd go to a bar and you had to kind of tuck it back because it could get your butt kicked, okay? There's a famous song by Jerry Jeff Walker, Up Against the Wall, Redneck Mother, and it's about kicking hippies' asses. And that was a very contentious time. If you think now is contentious, always been like this. But anyway, so what happened is, as near as I can tell, is that when World War II came and you had the shave tail phenomenon, everybody got their head shaved, and then all of a sudden manhood became a crew cut. And so hair became a statement by what became known as hippies and these long-haired freaks, okay? And so isn't it fascinating that a historian, somebody who went to college to study about history, would plant that prejudice onto a time that was 100 years before and make this leap of imagination that Wild Bill Hickok was gay. And I just, to this day, I just go, I'm sure we all do it. We all apply things that, I used to run into when you're studying about cowboys and stuff. And I grew up in Kingman, and I have Kingman cowboy cousins. Well, what you'd get is you'd get a lot of old timers that say, well, my dad said they never did that. Well, when was your dad? You know, in 1940s, you know, that's a long ways from the 1800s. I'll give you an example. So one of the cowboys that old cowboys that I knew, and I would love to talk to them because they tell great stories. And I said, how come you don't tuck your boots in? How come your boots are in? And he says, only dudes tuck their boots in. All right. And I tracked this down, and it's when the 1940s, when dude ranches became really successful, all the dudes would come and they wanted to dress like cowboys, and so they would tuck their boots in. So the only things that the wranglers could do to look different than these dudes is not do that. So you have a phenomenon that's from the 1940s where you don't tuck your boots in. And so I was talking to this old cowboy, and he was showing me pictures of his grandfather, and there was his grandfather in a corral in the 1890s. And I said, you mean tucked in like your grandfather's doing in that picture? Was he gay? No, I didn't say that because I got my duty kicked. But that's the phenomenon that I find so phenomenal is that we apply the standards of today onto what happened so long ago. Of course, Hickok came out west again, but his west was dying. He tried to get a party up in Cheyenne to go to Deadwood, the new outlaw town, and he was arrested for vagrancy. There are some. He looks emaciated. He marries a circus performer, Agnes Lake, and the last photo of him is with the best man, and he looks wan. He looks tired, and he's. There were rumors that he was losing his eyesight, and of course, Wild Bill was a ladies' man. Okay, Wild Bill had many admirers, as you can imagine, even before the showbiz days, and he had affairs with many women. And like other men of his type, Wyatt Earp, as it comes to mind immediately, is he never had children, and there are rumors that he had venereal disease, and that was affecting his eyesight. Joseph Rosa, who I dedicated the book to, he thought that he was suffering from sort of eyesight issues. There's some record that he went to Kansas City to have some eye issues done. So now we find Wild Bill. He joins a wagon train to go to Deadwood and see if he can get his last strike and retire or live happily ever after on a horse farm with his new wife. And in that wagon train is a sometime prostitute cross-dresser who has the amazing name of Calamity Jane. And how well they knew each other, probably not that well. They certainly weren't lovers. No one thinks that's true. But then what happens is that there she is. That's Calamity Jane posing at his grave. And what happened was she outlived him by about two and a half decades. She lived till 1903. And he is shot dead in the number 10 saloon in Deadwood in August of 1876. So in all that time, she would tell stories about how she saved him, how she cradled his head when he lay dying. And of course, that went over really well. And she just kept retelling that. And there's an old saying that every time an old timer retells a story, they get closer to the center of the stage. And so but let's talk a little bit about how he died. I think this is fascinating. He should have been out prospecting, or that's what he wanted to do, but he found himself gambling more and more and drinking. And him and his compadres had a camp outside of town, and he would go into the number 10 saloon and play cards. There are 5 myths about what happened. And I'm sure you've heard these, or some of them, because they've been portrayed over and over again in Westerns. And that is that Hickok always sat with his back to the door. And he did that when he was a Sheriff of Hayes in Abilene. And he developed this, protective thing that he always wanted to see who was coming through the door. Well, that's myth number 1. He was in the number 10 saloon in August of 1876, and he was facing the front door. Okay, he could see it right from where he sat. The second myth is that he was holding the dead man's hand, and what happened was Jack McCall probably wanted to kill Wild Bill because he was famous, and Jack McCall comes down the bar. It's it's the middle of the day. There's not that many people in the saloon. There's three other people, and there's four of them playing cards. And Jack McCall comes down the bar and fiddles with the gold wing. There's little weights there at the end of the bar, and then he feigns like he's going to the back door, and at the last second he turns and shoots Wild Bill in the back of the head. Now, remember I told you that story about the 7th Cav that the guy put the Remington in his ear and pulled the trigger and it didn't go off? The irony here is that the bullet goes through Wild Bill's head and hits a card-playing partner, Bill Massey, Captain Bill Massey, who's sitting across from Hickok, in the wrist. The bullet goes through his head, hits him in the wrist. Massey thinks that Hickok shot him because he didn't like the cards he was getting. And so the shot rings out. And if you've ever, here's another myth from the movies, okay? I had a friend who, people are shooting in a saloon and then they're talking and they're laughing and then they go back to what they're doing and everything like that. And I was talking to someone who was involved in a drug shootout in of all places, Payson, Arizona. And in fact, the guy told me that he was standing next to the guy who was shot. And his adversary came up, they exchanged words. The guy pulled out a .45 and shot him, point direct. My friend who witnessed this said he couldn't hear for 5 hours. He said it was when a .45 goes off in a crowded place like that, your ear's shot. Okay, so imagine that this has happened. The guy just put the pistol up the back of his head. So the legend says that Wild Bill was so quick on the draw that before the bullet came out, he had drawn his pistols. That's a myth. He didn't do anything. The other thing is that he fell forward onto the table and the hand was there and it was the dead man's hand, aces and eights. That is a myth because Hickok fell backwards. There's a reaction to a shooting that you go in the opposite direction. That happened here. He may have gone to the side. Eyewitnesses disagree on that, but didn't go forward. Okay. And then finally, the dead man's hand, which is famous. You've seen the scene where somebody reaches over and picks up the cards that are in his hand, and it's aces and eights, thus the dead man's hand. That's where that comes from. But in matter of fact, the cards were all over the floor in random. That's the most educated guess. Now, here's the kicker to the story. Jack McCall, this degenerate piece of sugar, he's threatening everybody, and he pulls the trigger again, and the gun misfires. It misfires twice. And so the luckiest gunfighter in the world has the luck come home and take him out. And that is a sad ending for a guy who didn't deserve that, but as George Burns once said, I don't deserve this award, but I have arthritis and I don't deserve that either. The fame is what killed him, in my opinion. So now we have he's killed in Deadwood. He's buried in a temporary grave, which is in a neighborhood now because the town grew up. But now we have Calamity Jane going around the country, and she appears at state fairs and things, and she's talking about her the person she loved, Wild Bill Hickok. And so she has 20 years to tell this story. So when she finally dies in 1903, she's so famous now that those two undertakers in the back there didn't put any precautions up around the body. And so all these people, is a crush of people. It's the largest crowd that ever been there. They come in and they start snipping her hair, taking souvenirs off her hair. And they have to put a catcher's helmet, basically a wire around her head. Okay. So now the town council meets and they said, where are we going to bury her? And one of the town council members said, it would be a great joke on Wild Bill. Let me see if I can get this quote right. It would be a good joke if Wild Bill knew that he would lay up with Jane for all eternity. And so the town council put her next to him. And to this day, I was just there last year, and I said, you need to make the Mecca to see the grave of Wild Bill. And Calamity Jane's right next to him, and you know that Wild Bill is just spinning in his grave. And that's what I love. I love the humor in these stories. You know, Billy the Kid's extremely humorous. When they asked him, he was getting as famous as Buffalo Bill, what do you think of that? And his quote was, "There's no money in it." That's a great quote. You know, the Billy Kid also said, there's been over 200 people killed in Lincoln County. I didn't shoot all of them, okay? That's a guy who has a sense of humor. So Wild Bill, when they asked him if his stories were true, he said, quote, "Pretty near all these stories are true." Now, isn't that, it doesn't get any better than that. That's just fantastic. So I love the guy. I really enjoyed doing the book, and all the photos of him are just spectacular. He wore a red sash. He wore the pistol butts forward. He had it going on. So I believe that the entire Western genre is based on this one guy. One guy creates an industry of every single movie you've ever seen. Anytime you're watching Gunsmoke and the two guys in the street, that's Dave Tutt. He's the guy. So say a prayer for Wild Bill, and while you're at it, go buy the book so you can see for yourself just how groovy this cat was. I think we got some time for some questions. Let's see if we... was Wild Bill that accurate, or was it a lucky shot? Jim Hitchner asked that. He reportedly was a really excellent shot and put on exhibitions that people wrote about at the time. Now, there may be some... there certainly is a lot of after the fact, splitting of the card or that kind of nonsense. But I think by and large, he was an excellent, and he really, several eyewitnesses have told about how he cleaned his gun every night, and black powder pistols are really notorious for jamming because it gets caught in the barrel. And so he cleaned his guns every night. In fact, the day he died, he went out next to the river and fired off loads out of all of his things, and then cleaned it. That was a daily ritual that he had. So I think it's pretty sure. I think it's pretty safe to say that he was really a good shot. How many gunfights did Wild Bill actually get into? I don't know the actual number. I do at one point. You'll have to look it up in my book. I would say that the number is 5 or 6 if you really start getting all the little. Phil Coe was his last fight. That's a tragic fight because he was so quick. There's 50 cowboys in town, and they were all drunk, and it was just him. And he fired and hit Phil Coe and all these other Texas cowboys there. And he hears somebody running, and this person comes on the corner, and he turns and fires and shoots him. And it was his own deputy. And he never was a lawman again. He never was in a gunfight after that. That just he paid for his funeral. He was really upset, as you can imagine, from that. In a biography, it said that his eyesight was failing. Truth, Mike McDonald. Yes, we talked about that a little bit here this evening. Yes, he probably did have eyesight issues, and he was a notorious saloon carousing, and probably had. Joe Rosso thinks he had syphilis, so that would answer that question. Last question. Did you ever have an affair with Libby Custer? Oh, my goodness. Libby Custer, I'm going to read you an excerpt that she wrote about Wild Bill. After her husband, of course, George Armstrong Custer died, she wrote a book, and in it she describes him, and you just have to let me find it here because this is just so rich. Here it is. Physically, he was a delight to look upon, tall, lithe, and free in every motion. He rode and walked as if every muscle was perfection, and the careless swing of his body as he moved seemed perfectly in keeping with the man, the country, the time in which he lived. I think she had the hots for. I wish somebody'd say that about me. Maybe one of you will write that about me. No, maybe you won't. Hey, you guys have been great. I hope you have a great time, and I hope you'll go get the book. I think you'll have as much fun as I did in writing the book. Thank you.